I'll be talking to Werner Diwald, who is chairman of the Deutsche Wasserstoff- und Brennstoffzellenverband, the German Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association, to Dr. Ruprecht Brandes, who is the Director of External Affairs at BP at the end there, hello, to Dr. Simon Born, who's CTO at ITM Power. The booth is right over there. You can see the logo. And last but not least, Florian Bergen, who's at Siemens, and he is the Project Development Director for Power to X projects. Welcome to you all. I think we should begin with a general idea of the scale of the topic. 40 gigawatts Electrolyzer Alliance, the incubator for European industry leadership. Werner, what does that number, 40 gigawatts, really represent in terms of scale?
Yeah, it sounds very huge. 40 gigawatt, we see now in the market, perhaps in Europe, 50 megawatts, between 50 and 100 megawatts. So 50 gigawatts, the first people who hear that, if we bring this idea on the table, say we are really crazy. But then we show, or we make, present some calculations why we come to this number, 40 gigawatts. In Germany, we discussed, for example, now that we need in 2030 10% of the fuels which we need in the market or deliver to the market should become from e-fuels. So the base is hydrogen. That means we need only for this market 20 gigawatts. And there are for refineries to replace the gray hydrogen through green hydrogen, it's 2 gigawatts. So only in Germany there's a market 2030, not to be very, very ambitious. So we need it for the energy world or for the changing to reach the climate targets and so on. 25 gigawatts only in Germany. And that was the reason why I say for Europe, 40 gigawatts, that is really a realistic number. And on the other side, that means, or that shows that we need an industry. There's the market for 40 billion euros turnaround. And that is, so that is a message of this alliance, that we say, okay, we have to work together. We need an industry strategy from the member states and from the European Union to hold the industry here and give the industry the possibility to increase in this, in the size which it needs to be competitive in the world. And I think that is really now the starting point in 2020 or 2019 now. 2020 is nearly reached. That we reach it to 2030, so that is only 10 years. And 40 gigawatt, that is really a huge amount. But we believe, and we have spoken with the electrolyzer companies, it's possible if they get the right legal framework.
And the framework is a huge issue here. I find there's so much in the detail here. We're talking about a quantity of energy in the future that is not simply the electrical grid. We're talking about, and here's the big term that we've started to use in the elevator pitches, which happen on Tuesday and Wednesday, fossil fuel parity, storing renewable energy in quantities that make it in excess of the electrical grid, something that really is addressing issues like energy security. We're on that path right now. From a manufacturing side, because that is, Simon, what you do. You manufacture very successfully the electrolyzer technology. What form of scale-ups are we talking about here?
Scale is a great question, and one of the main challenges ITM has had as an electrolyzer manufacturer is that, as well as the volume of electrolyzers increasing year on year, also the scale is increasing drastically as well. And it's really important that manufacturers develop the capabilities to be able to expose themselves to that growing demand. And at ITM, our largest project is at a refinery. It's a 10 megawatt electrolyzer. And that is really defining how ITM is going to address that scale up so that we can standardize what we're producing to be able to meet this growing demand. And the scale that is being talked about here is entirely relevant. I mean, in the UK, our electricity generation is at 60 gigawatts. So for hydrogen to really show its best, it needs to be at utility scale. So it's entirely appropriate to be thinking at this sort of level. And we are, the industry has the technology, and we are developing the capabilities to up our manufacturing. But as we go up the next order of magnitude, it's important that the structure is in place to give industry the confidence to really put its money where its mouth is and take that next step.
And it is all about financing that next step as well. You already have one cooperation with Shell in the United States. Here I'm addressing the notion of cooperation because in terms of scale, well, you're the biggest man on the block here, Ruprecht. What motivates the cooperation with the electrolysis industry here? Is this an advantage for your business model? Is it generosity? How did you get involved?
No, it's a big potential for us, and we have to, we are thinking about the energy and mobility transition that is happening, and I don't need to explain, what has triggered this development, the Paris Agreement in particular, but lots of other regulations in the EU and other places. And of course, we are thinking constantly how the energy and mobility world is changing. And so far, we are producing gasoline and diesel from oil by using hydrogen that has been produced either from natural gas or LPG. And what we are looking at is to reduce the carbon footprint of the gasoline and diesel production in the refinery by using green hydrogen that has been produced from electrolysis. And we see a big potential and also a need for that, because by law we are required to blend biofuels into our fuel, but this is not enough. So we are also not only looking at the blending potential, but also what could be done in the production of gasoline and diesel to reduce carbon emissions. And in that regard, green hydrogen is a very interesting project. And we are working on that to make that happen.
It's interesting that we're talking about this issue and we haven't even addressed things like energy security. What I mean by that, of course, is that Germany itself imports massively, is dependent on entirely things like natural gas for heating. And not all countries in the world would be comfortable with that. The big option right now is the subject of one of your talks recently, Florian. It's power to X. By power, we're talking really exclusively, though, about renewable energies, a source of energy that right now is being curtailed. Do you have a solution for that?
Yes, I would say, I mean, we at Siemens, we see green hydrogen is definitely the enabler for deep decarbonization, what we are all aiming for. We see our grid constraints we have already today, and we are not saying we don't need grid extension. We definitely need the grid expansion in Germany, but on top, we also need power to X solutions to store energy. Converting it into hydrogen is the first step. Converting it into other liquid fuels makes it a lot easier to handle. Mm-hmm. And even the step to bring it into the fuel distribution is a very easy step with methanol. You can convert it into methanol by bounding it to CO2. And the methanol can directly be blended into fuel. And that's a first easy step where we already are at the brink of commercial viability, mm-hmm, already today. But another interesting part, we spoke about the capacities. And we spoke about the 40 gigawatts, and at the moment we look at, rather gigawatts, we look at the megawatt market. And it's interesting with what speed the market is developing. And I think there were many surveys asking the industry, and the capacity of manufacturing the megawatts and gigawatts of equipment is there. It's only a matter of a very short click of regulations, and then I believe the market would be there.
The regulation issue is really super important. When we talk about successful business models right now, you've got things up and running. It's grid stabilization, for example. There's already an existing market there. How limited, though, is that market? How fast is it growing? And what is the growth potential when everyone else gets on board with policy? Simon?
Yeah, well, it's growing tremendously quickly. And ITM as a company is virtually double in size in terms of the number of people it was this time last year. And we are, one of our biggest challenges is being able to scale up our manufacturing to meet demand. And we are actually in the process right now of co-locating to a larger facility that will give us 5 times as much space. We're starting to introduce the semi-automated production processes and things like that, so that we can get that scale into existence. Because I think we all agree that, you know, 300 terawatt hours a year gas, 700 terawatt hours a year for fuel, 900 terawatt hours a year for gas, electricity, fuel, gas, that order, and what technologies are out there that enable us to decarbonize at that sort of scale. You know, this is inevitable. Hydrogen is a crucial enabler for all of that to take place. So it is inevitable. We just need that switch, and then the industry is there ready with the capability to respond to that.
I suppose this is a point where we reach a dialogue between you two. Werner, first of all, to talk about the luxury side of hydrogen, its abundance, the fact that you can convert renewable energy into hydrogen, but I think the real advantage in Germany is you got lots of places to store this, don't you? Sorry? You have lots of places to store hydrogen in the country as well.
Yeah, I think that is a good situation for Germany, that we have the salt caverns to store a huge amount of energy. Especially if we look how many or how big the amount of storage capacity must be in 2050. So we need around 50 terawatt hours for energy security supply. 50 terawatt hours is a huge number. And if we look to the north, especially to North Saxonia, we have the salt cavern you can be able to store now. They are ready to hydrogen to store 70 terawatt hours. So I think that is the good message. So renewable energy means if we make it in the right way, if we have a right strategy, we have no problems with energy security supply. And not only for the electricity market, I think we have to look to the mobility market. In the moment, it's a little bit crazy what happens there. We discuss battery cars, that is a solution, but nobody discussed that. Especially for the mobility sector, energy security supply is important too. So the trucks who deliver the goods through Germany, and sometimes a little bit crazy, if you look Amazon, you get it 5 hours later and so on. But the customers expected it. And you can't say your customer, sorry, the wind is not blowing and the sun is not shining, we can't deliver the food, whatever, the shoes, the new ones. So you need a storage. And we come from a mobility world who lives in a storage world. So if you look to a diesel car or to a petrol car, each filling station is a storage, the refinery is a storage, each car is a storage, no problem. So hydrogen brings the solutions too. We have the salt caverns, we have the pipes can store, the filling station are the store, and it's completely independent from the weather, from the demand, from the offer of renewable energy in this moment. And I think that we have to discuss it more. That is, in all these different sectors, is energy supply very important. In the moment, we discuss it only for the electricity sector, and I think that is a big, big mistake.
Yes, I would like to add regarding mobility, and would like to describe the new framework or the challenges we are facing. Everybody is aware that not only the European Union, but also most of the member states have climate reduction, climate goals, greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. And in Germany in particular, we have this 55% reduction goal by 2030, based on 1990. And this is broken down into various sectors, and mobility has the goal of to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40 to 42%. And you may have heard or read in the press that a working group, the Working Group 1 of the National Platform Mobility, has just delivered its so-called status report and has concluded that there's a huge potential for electrical mobility between 7 and 10.5 million electrical cars by 2030. But still, you know, we have a car pool of about 45 or 46 million cars. So that means for the other more than 35 million cars, you also need alternatives. And what is pretty clear that by 2030, we still have the internal combustion engines. And that means that the fuels we are using then, and I don't say diesel and gasoline, I'm talking about fuels we are using then, have to have a much lower carbon footprint than they have today. And that is the reason why, you know, we have started with blending biofuels into diesel and gasoline, but that is not the end of the story. We also have to look what is possible in terms of the production of diesel and gasoline, but also a step further, what could be done in terms of synthetic fuels. And for all that, hydrogen is essential. It's a key component of alternative fuels. And so I think it is a no-brainer that green hydrogen has a big market in mobility, because these regulatory requirements, they are set. You know, they can't be done away. And so we are looking at this potential. Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to add one other huge advantage of green hydrogen and Power-to-X and liquid fuels we can produce. That is with the electric mobility, which was mentioned, the 25 million and the remaining 15 million of combustion engines. That is number one. And the other point is that we will also have trucks and ships and planes which will rely on, a long period on combustion engines. And what Power-to-X can deliver is that we can take the load of our own renewable resources. We can consume our renewable resources, use them for electric mobility, because there is no other way. We have to draw it from the grid and have to produce it in Germany or in Europe. But if we look towards Power-to-X and hydrogen, we can produce it in areas in the world where there's abundant potential of renewables. And because of its transportability, it's very easy to produce it there at very low prices and ship it back and import it to Europe.
I mentioned within this discussion, in the prep talk, could we have another chair on the stage, please? Could we have another chair on the stage? Okay. We're being joined soon by another colleague. But to get back to this debate, someone mentioned the electrical car. Well, there was a strategic decision yesterday announced. The Ministry of Transportation is going to pour $1 billion of your taxpayer euros into the electrical grid in order to allow for charging of an increasing volume of electrical cars. Now, for me, there's two big questions there. One, we know, thanks to the wonderful number crunchers at Jülich, that if you build up an electrical grid for cars and compare that to the capital expenditures for a hydrogen fueling station network, you discover that right now it's cheap to fuel an electric car, but in fact in the future the cost of fueling an electric car is more expensive than fueling a fuel cell car, added to which that you have better range. So there's, for me, a fundamental issue. Of course, the last is where you get the energy from, and if the energy is already being stored in hydrogen, it makes great sense to use that in that form. And I see there's 3 people who want to answer this question, so we'll start with Werner and move in this direction.
Okay, so in Germany, Hydrogen Mobility, that is the company who built in the moment for all the companies, the hydrogen filling stations, had made or ordered in a study, who compare these two situations, and really that is a really fair comparison. So they look what happens in 2050 if we install a full electricity grid system to store or to charge the cars, and compare to the hydrogen filling station system, including electrolyzers to produce the hydrogen, to store the hydrogen, and so on. So it's really a little bit more positive for the electricity system than for the hydrogen system. And the result was that the hydrogen system is 13 billion euros cheaper than the electricity solutions. And I think that is a message, and that is realistic. And there's not really analyzed what happens if suddenly 40 million cars plugged in at the same time. That is really, for the cities especially, I think on the country it's more easy to solve, but in the big cities like Berlin or like Paris, London or wherever. So the grid system, you can't grow each street and build a new line in it and say, okay, there's no problem to charge with 350 kV per charging point. So if you have there, I make some calculation for the middle of Berlin, there's a Pariser place it calls, it's an office area in the middle of the city, and there are over 10,000 placing areas. So you need a 400 megawatt substation to offer enough charging points for electricity mobility. That means 5% of this park, of this relaxed area in the middle, it's Tiergarten, you need only for this substation. And I think that shows how complex it is really only to think in a battery world, electricity world. Of course we need it, and for a short distance, but I think we need a combination of both systems, and that is very important. And that is in the moment a little bit, in my view, a problem that the German government runs out and say we need batteries. We make now a next sub-series system for 1 billion euros only for battery charging, and hydrogen is a little bit, very down, or very not visible.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I think it would be a mistake to break down the whole discussion only on costs and how many subsidies are needed. You have to look at the you have to make a cost-benefit analysis across the whole range. What is offered by the various technologies, and I think it is without dispute that battery technology, the electrical car fueled by batteries, has a big advantage in inner cities, because it's a zero emissions technology, zero emissions cars. But if you look at the production of electrical cars, or of the battery for electrical cars, then the picture is mixed. And if you look at the usage for long distances, it's still a big problem for electrical cars, because they have to be recharged every 200 or 300 kilometers. In that regard, the fuel cell may have a much bigger potential than is thought today, and that is the fuel cell needs hydrogen. That means also green hydrogen. But still, because we are living in this transition, now we have 46 million passenger cars in Germany. We have roughly, I think, 300,000 or 400,000 electrical cars. That is both battery and hybrid cars. That will increase. But you can see from this increase, even if we have 10 or 12 million by 2030, we still will have more than 30 million cars that have an internal combustion engine. Whatever the big car makers are saying, when they want to phase out the internal combustion engine, but in 11 years' time, we have more than 30 million cars still with an internal combustion engine, and they also need fuel. I think what we are going to see over the next 20 to 25 years is a big diversity of technologies that are required to fuel various kinds of cars. And the challenge is not only to focus on one technology, but to look at all technologies. What can they contribute in terms of CO2 emissions reduction?
Before we continue on the topic, because there's so much to say on that, we have to introduce our new guest here, who, due to transportation, was delayed, Jyrki Chatzimarkakis, who's the General Secretary of Hydrogen Europe. And interestingly, it's really you two who launched this whole concept, and I believe it came from you, this notion of the 40 gigawatt Electrolyzer Alliance. We initiated our talk with the subject. Perhaps you could explain your philosophy. 40 gigawatt Electrolyzer Alliance. What stands behind that for you conceptually?
Well, conceptually, it's very simple. If we think the old sense, Europeans produced a big Anlagenbau, so big systems, and exported them. This is exactly what we need to do again. I come back to the car, but it's the same thing I want to say. We need to stop to believe in myths. We need to do the math. What does that mean? We cannot have renewable energy produced in Europe. It is not possible. The renewable energy that we need to feed the industry, to feed the nice cars, to feed, warming and cooling, this is not possible. So we need to understand that we need to import renewably produced hydrogen, possibly also decarbonized hydrogen. In order to get that hydrogen from Saudi Arabia, Northern Africa, Ukraine, we need to produce electrolyzers here. There are not so many fields in the hydrogen technologies where we are still leading as Europeans. In the field of electrolyzers, we are leading. And that was the idea to scratch, so to say, the European Commission where they like it to be scratched, European patriotism. So they want to support technologies where we are leading. And this is one where we are leading. I'm very confident that if we put our efforts together, if we understand also our role as Europe to be a technology leader in electrolysis, then I think that 20 gigawatt until 2030, so in 10 years, is absolutely feasible. We were quite surprised, to be honest, when we talked to big industry, Siemens, ThyssenKrupp, but also to some players that are around here, Nel, others, that they think it's doable. It is not something that is out of scope. It's absolutely doable. Allow me one remark concerning myth and math when it comes to mobility. When it comes to mobility, I have to say, why are we sitting here and talking about the advantages of fuel cell? Are we crazy? We know it 10 years, 15 years. If we do the math correctly and we stop to think about that myth that some, not Siemens people, but some people here in Germany invented, curtailed energy needs to go into batteries of cars. Does it happen? No. It does not happen in the extent we need it. So if we do the math, we understand that all the visions of Mr. Dies or some politicians at the moment will not work out. What will work out is very simple. Mr. Dies will get taxpayers' money for his scheme to release workers. That's what will happen. So he uses a politically correct issue, electromobility, and of course the politicians will say, yeah, it's less jobs. Oh, yeah. Okay, we pay the pension schemes of your workers. That is what is going on, and I think we have to dismantle it. We have to say it clearly, because it doesn't make sense that I personally will be very proud to drive a Hyundai Nexo as a European. I will be proud. I'm very happy to drive the Hyundai Nexo, but that shouldn't be the case. It should be the case that I have a Hyundai as a second car. It should be a very proud driver of a Volkswagen, of a Daimler, of an Audi, BMW. Where are they? So that's my problem, and that is why we need to stop myths and say it clearly and not repeat every year again and again here at the Hannover Fair how nice the fuel cell is. It is nice, but unfortunately it's not European anymore. Thank you.
It's interesting that the issue of the battery and the fuel cell car, why is it so interesting? We were talking about this in the prep. We have the choice between importing batteries with all the capital expenditure going out of the country, or exporting tech. We have the success story already here. So two things I'd like to address there. One is, of course, the tech side. The other side, of course, is you already represent 1.5 million workers in the German economy. So I'm sure you're as passionate as Jorgo is about this very interesting point. We should be thinking about the combination of effects. An export commodity, you're already exporting. We'll get back to that. A feasible technology, and actually the best technology when it boils down to it. But from the jobs perspective, what does this represent if we keep those jobs in the country, if we focus on the fuel cell technology and remain skeptical to agnostic about the battery cars, which operate anyway better if they're in combination with the fuel cell, let's face it.
But look, so there's now coming out the hydrogen, the roadmap of hydrogen Europe. It's done by the Commission or under the role of under FCHEU. So they pointed out there are a chance to create 5.4 million new jobs in hydrogen business. And before the Hydrogen Council make a study, or McKinsey make a study for Hydrogen Council, they pointed out 30 million jobs over the world in hydrogen business. And I think normally if you come to an economic minister for economy, like Mr. Altmaier, and say, I have a good idea, there's a new business and we can produce, I don't know, new cars or like planes, like Airbus. and we create 100,000 new jobs. Then he will be run out and say, great idea, that is my idea, we create 100 jobs. Now we come, but it's hydrogen, and Mr. D's don't like it. If we say we can create 5.4 million jobs, normally the minister must say, and we get 90% of them, and what we have to do. And I think that must be more the style, how we go forward, what the feeling, and not that we have every time to explain why it's so important. And so normally it must be complete another direction. The politicals must come to us and say, how we can do it, how you can help me. That is my political story. And I try to make now the right things, the right law. But we have completely other situation. If you look to the Renewable Energy Directive, they try to forbid sector coupling, because they say you have to link the electrolyzer directly to the wind park. So you have a wind park there, you have to switch off the wind park, 7 terawatt hours last year, and you have to produce or build a new wind park which is connected directly to the electrolyzer and produce only hydrogen. That is crazy. That helps not the electricity system, that nobody on the streets will understand that. 7 terawatt hours we switched off means that we can replace the whole hydrogen which we produce in the moment from natural gas in Germany. So that is climate protection. That is a strategy, and I think we need it because it is really a big chance. And this situation we see it now in the coal sectors. We have to say to the people, sorry, there's a structure changing, go home. Okay, we can't move back the clock. But we have to look forward and say, we have to learn from that. And now hydrogen is a solution. And we see what happens in 2050. There stands in the big headline, zero emission. And then we can discuss it's 10% or 5%. It's a complete changing of our energy world. And what Jorgo said is right. In the end, we have to import renewable energies. And via electricity cable, that is not possible. So energy carrier is hydrogen, perhaps it's methanol, whatever. But the basic is hydrogen. And for that is a chance now. We have to present the industry here. We have to establish the industry here. And then we can export the industry, or the components, the devices, what we produce. We do it in all these other sectors. Take cars, for example. In Germany, you can drive so fast you want on the highway. The reason is to sell Porsche. Because you have to bring the evidence. We can build fast cars. And it works. So if you look to other countries, they buy AMG, they buy Porsche. Good profit, good idea, a lot of jobs. But the same study or the same story we should do with hydrogen. And I think we have here two companies who are the best example for that. Let us give them the economic framework, and they be able to deliver and to create new jobs, the jobs of tomorrow.
And the technology does exist, you know. I mean, this isn't. We've seen the industry transition from small electrolyzers to get to the megawatt scale, a 10 megawatt scale, and we're talking about 100 megawatt scale. Now we're discussing gigawatts, and it is there. People are doing very large projects now. We have very large companies doing new things, trying to demonstrate that the technology is real and that it can provide a reliable way to decarbonize their industries. And you know, we say the same thing again and again. The root of all of this is we need hydrogen. We need electrolysis to get hydrogen from renewable electricity. That is the enabler. That's what we've got to do. And the industry is responding. And if we can get across this next gap, we can get the incentives right to be able to take that next step, you start to get this virtuous circle of scale and cost. If you make bigger stuff, you can start to get the cost down in a really meaningful way. And let's let that run, let that fly.
We're slowly running out of time, so it's really unfair to ask for short answers. But just recently we heard this comment, okay, so what we do now is grid balancing. Any curtailed energy, you're willing to work with that. And why? We shouldn't be criticizing that, because this is the business model. You need to develop volume, okay? So on the question of volume and how we get there, I'm going to start with you, Rupert, because in the good old days, we need volume in two areas. Electrolyzers, of course, but also the fuel cell industry. If you go back 10 years in time, you discovered that people had the replacement for the classical Gasetagenheizung, that is the gas units here. Rather than having gas burnt in your apartment, in your home, they had a PEM cell with a reformer and a fuel cell in it. This is a wonderful way to increase volume. Now, the interesting thing about that is it is 30% more efficient. It involves engineering, that is, you have to coordinate the supply of power from one house to the next. Where is the gas industry on this issue of phasing in optimally the volume of manufacturing for the fuel cell industry, also as a method for consuming natural gas? And where is its contribution towards financing the electrolysis branch?
Yeah. I think there are lots of studies about the potential and the volumes that are possible, but what is too often overlooked is the bottleneck that we have in terms of regulations. You know, we have the old energy world that is dominated and regulated by thousands of different regulations, and now we are, you know, step by step moving into the new energy world, and this new energy world requires new regulations. And we have a tendency to talk too much about the big picture, about the potential, the costs, the studies, and we are neglecting that I think hundreds of regulations ought to be changed, ought to be amended to adjust to the new environment. And as soon as this is in place, you know, we have removed this bottleneck, and then, you know, also the development and the market will show what is possible in terms of volume.
Florian, the best tip for increasing volume? Do you have any ideas on how we're going to get more electrolyzers short-term online?
Yeah, one idea would be a quick execution of the RED II in Europe, in all the member states. This would automatically enable or immediately enable a worldwide market. And we are already today talking to projects all over the world, ready to export fuel to Europe if the regulations are in place. So that would really increase the volume.
Jorgo, you get the concluding remarks here on how we get from A to B to 40 gigawatts in the next, what, 20 years?
No, 10 years. I start with a very concrete example and then with the big picture. Both are needed. The very concrete example is electrolysis in refineries. So we managed in the Renewable Energy Directive to input, as Hydrogen Europe, together with the help of some friends, to input the possibility for refineries to use green hydrogen in the upstream process. And Werner was very instrumental. Werner helped a lot in that respect, so that members, the refinery can go to their members and say, hey, I'm reducing CO2 emissions by changing from biofuel emitting to electrolysis. If that is accepted, now RED II will be implemented into national law the next 2 years. If the Germans do it, if the Dutch do it, if the Belgians do it, we have already a blueprint for a monster program of electrolysis, because these guys here, they can afford to invest into electrolysis. They will do, because it's much better for the fuel. So the quality of the fuel will be better because they don't need to emit biofuels anymore. So number one, it works. We work for that, and we are now waiting for the results. The second is the big picture. It's the gas package. I'm just arriving from Bucharest, where the European energy ministers are now there together yesterday and today. And for a second time in a row, the European energy ministers dealt with hydrogen. Their last meeting was in Linz in Austria at Voestalpine, where the Austrian government, Austrian presidency wanted to show we can use electrolyzer green hydrogen for steel production. And they all signed the hydrogen declaration. And it continued. That's very, very rare that the energy ministers continue to work on hydrogen. And we discussed the gas grid, the smart use of the gas grid for more renewables. And guess what is number one in that gas grid? That's hydrogen. So we discussed definitely how to shape the next gas package. It will be the fourth gas package. And it will be about how to accelerate the process to have more green or decarbonized hydrogen. So targets, feed-in tariffs, blending, But more and more, and that's very important because you asked, why is the gas industry not working on fuel cells? More and more they are working on pure hydrogen, on dedicated pipeline systems for hydrogen. And that is very encouraging for us to see that the huge gas grid, which is 20 times bigger than the power grid in Europe, and can therefore transport renewable energy 10 to 20 times cheaper, will be used for hydrogen. So fuel cell, yes, will be a benefiter in the end, but now we are working on the infrastructure. And I can tell you, I saw the President of the EU Council yesterday and also this morning. It works. They believe in it. The Commission is behind that. And I can possibly announce, because a representative of the German ministry was yesterday there. Also, next week, the Germans will announce a roadmap on hydrogen, and that's very encouraging. The Austrians did already. The Dutch did already. The French did also somehow. So you see more and more hydrogen roadmaps of member states, and that is very, very encouraging.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but we will be continuing this topic. I point you all towards the elevator pitches on today at 3 and tomorrow at 3 in the afternoon, because it's all about electrolysis, and we'll have an opportunity to see the various companies involved. Otherwise, I'd like to thank all of my guests here, and thank you for showing up late, but still here. Jurgo Chatzimarkakis, who's General Secretary of Hydrogen Europe. Sitting next to him is Dr. Ruprecht Brandes, who's Director External Affairs at BP Europe, SE. Florian Bergen from Siemens AG, he's Project Development Director, Power to X at Siemens. And Dr. Simon Born, of course, from ITM Power. The booth is right over there. And Werner Diwald, Chairman of Wasserstoff- und Brennstoffzellen-Verband. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I hope we can do something like this again next year. Thank you.